So my name is Jonathan Busfield. I'm joined here by John Cuna. John, you and I started Riser+Tread in 2019, combining over 20 years of experience into our mission as a company, which is to help as many young guys as we can, step up and move forward in their lives through a combination of therapy and coaching. And so maybe you can speak to a little bit about why we thought this would be a good idea to have this Q&A series.
Yeah, I think, especially during the times now, we wanted to try to get in front of as many people as we could and provide the information that we've learned just with the experience of working with young guys. And there's still a barrier to seeing guys like us, and so we'll get into that in a little bit. And I think that having the opportunity for us to share our thoughts and share some things that can be really helpful for accessing us and using our resources, I think that was part of the reason we wanted to just be sharing our experience with everybody to get a better sense of how they can help their young guys.
Absolutely. I think there are definitely some patterns we've picked up on in all our time working in this field and working with young guys. And I think it's important that we start to touch on those and we make that information available to a lot of parents out there, especially because they can help with that information, I think. On that note, the first question we got for this first episode in our Q&A series is from a mother in Newton who reached out, and we're really thankful for that question. Basically, what she asked was, how can we get teen boys to ask for and accept help when they are in denial about how bad things are in their life? And I think, John, maybe you can speak to how often do you get this question from parents?
All the time. I get a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls from people looking for, I've got my son, I'm really worried about him. But when we bring this topic up, he's, resistant to it, doesn't want to. And, I find myself talking a lot to families and parents about ways in which that you can approach this situation and talk about this in a different way. And, we're going to get into some of the barriers and give you guys some language to use with young guys that helps it make it more available so that we can be, trying to get in front of as many guys as we can to offer that support. But it's definitely one of the most frequently asked questions that I get from parents who are calling and reaching out to me about, how do we even start this process? They know that there's a need. They know their son needs help. Just getting them to come to talk to guys like us has been the hardest part. And that's what I spent a lot of time talking about with parents, at least in the very beginning.
Absolutely. You make some great points. I think guys tend to be very resistant to the idea of therapy. And I think that has changed over the last 10 years, especially, but there's still a little bit of a ways to go before that happens as much as we'd like. And that kind of brings me to, what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some things for parents to consider overall with regard to this question. We're also going to get into some do's and don'ts. So things parents can do that might help their son, get to a point where they can accept help, and some things not to do. Some things that will probably make it less likely to happen or might be counterproductive to their son being willing to accept some help. So some things to consider in general. I think there's a big difference between a willingness to ask for help versus accept help. I think young guys are rarely going to ask for help. Some of them do, and it's getting better, but a lot of times we want to set our expectations a little bit lower and really try to get the focus on their willingness to accept help first. And then eventually down the line, when they get a little bit older, they'll be willing to come out and ask for help themselves. So that's one thing. The mental health spectrum is another thing. I think if their son is dealing with something pretty intense, intense depression, intense anxiety, any kind of suicidal ideation, substance use or substance abuse, those are things that really need to be handled quickly. And so there might be less flexibility for a parent to give choice to their son. They might need to really insist on services starting sooner than later just because of the severity of the problem. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, if their son is struggling with grades, but they're not fully depressed or really struggling with anxiety to the point where they're avoiding things in life, there's some more flexibility around when to start. So that's one thing. The mental health spectrum. Age is another factor. How you talk to and treat a 12 or 13-year-old son versus a 16 or 17-year-old is going to be a little bit different. The 16 and 17-year-old, they're close to adult age and they're going to want a little bit more control, and you might want to give them a little more control over the decision-making around when to start services. And then there's barriers. Barriers are a big thing to consider when it comes to, why someone's son might not be willing to come in. And John, I'd love for you to touch on that a little bit. What are some of the biggest barriers you see for a guy to be willing to come in and accept help?
Well, one of the biggest ones, and we usually touch upon it within the first couple of sessions, is just sort of the concept of masculinity. And, we get these social cues from all over the place about, be a man, suck it up, tough it out, emotions are weak. You know, we hear all of these different things, and guys specifically, and then without the support of being able to talk about those things, they start to internalize that that's real. And, you know, I think getting over some of those things and talking openly about those has been a real help, but it's definitely one of the biggest barriers that I see of just going and talking to somebody like us is sort of in direct contradiction to how they feel of being a man is or should be. And so we try to reconstruct and talk about the importance of receiving help, not to the detriment of, you know, it doesn't make you less of a man because you need to ask for help or receive some support in whatever it is that you're going through. That's one of the biggest pieces that we, you know, that I find in my conversations with guys. And I definitely find that once I have that conversation, the communication is much more open. There's a little bit of like freedom and almost permission to talk about those things openly, because for the most part, guys don't have that flexibility or time to talk about those things openly, because it's such a taboo subject and there is still like a pretty significant stigma. It's definitely coming down, which is great. And we've seen that, that guys are more willing, but there's still a long way that we have to go. And so I think more conversations in this setting, also like us sharing our thoughts with everybody, but also having it sort of on the ground floor with the actual guys who are going through it, is a real help. And hopefully we can start to minimize those barriers.
Yeah, you make some great points, man. I think the concept of masculinity is definitely something that we see a lot. They have sort of these ideas of what that is coming in to therapy to begin with, and sometimes those have to be questioned a little bit, and we have to work on those together. And the stigma you mentioned is absolutely still an issue. I think it's gotten better, but especially amongst young guys and their groups of friends, there still very much is a stigma a lot of times around seeking mental health care. So that's definitely still a barrier. A couple other barriers. One is confidentiality. You know, I think we've talked about that a lot, where young guys are often very afraid that if they're not 18 yet and their parents ask them to go get therapy or go meet with a therapist or a coach like us, that, you know, how do they know that the stuff that they tell us is not going to get right back to their parents? And that's something we often address right away in our sessions with the young guys, and especially we tell their parents that too, that yes, we want to update you on the goals of treatment and the progress that's being made, but we're not going to divulge personal information. That's really important that their son knows that whatever they say to us really stays in session with us. Certain things excluded, like safety concerns and things like that. But we make a big point of addressing that at the beginning. So that's confidentiality and trust in parents. I think the parent-child relationship, the parent-son relationship, is crucial in general. And we've talked about that a lot in terms of that's the most important thing in their life. If they can maintain healthy relationships with their parents, that's the most important thing to their overall well-being. If their relationship is not in a great place and their trust is not there for their parents, and their parents suggest coming to therapy because it came from the parent, that idea of therapy came from the parent, they might reject it outright just because of that. So in those cases, it might be good to involve some other people in the community, like a pediatrician or school personnel, school adjustment counselor, or guidance counselor, so that the message or the request to go get help is not just coming from the parents. So those are some other barriers. And John, I'd love to kick it to you to talk about some of the do's. You know, we're going to get into the do's and don'ts. These are things that parents can do to maximize the chance that their son is going to be willing to meet with somebody like us and get the help that they probably need. So what comes to mind for you when it comes to some of the things parents can do?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is the acknowledgement of the barriers that exist. So going in and talking about it with their sons, knowing that these are some of the uphill battles that they're probably going to be, you know, going against. I think just having understanding that, and even maybe naming that in the conversation, you know, having someone tell you that there's something wrong or that you need to go see someone. For guys, it's like the common things I see is, and I hear is like, well, I'm broken, I can't do it myself. And so I think going at it from a supportive approach of, hey, let's go talk to this person, and see what we can do, see what they have. They might have some different ideas of better ways that you can establish some, you know, more healthy habits, some different ways of thinking about things. You know, I really try to frame myself as, you know, we combine sort of therapy and coaching. And so I often am referred to as like a mental fitness coach or a coach in general. And I think that language that you use is vital when working with young guys, and going and saying, you know, we're going to go talk to a therapist might be too challenging, but using language around, we're going to go talk to a coach, is much more appropriate, and something more of language that they're accustomed to hearing. Coaches are there to support, coaches are there to coach, coaches are there to teach. And that's a much more comfortable environment, even though that the work is going to be the same. Just the way that you frame it and how you do it is really important. I think that Jotham touched on this before, but, you know, that 16 and above range, giving them that control. Hey, we're going to go. Riser+Tread offers free consultations for any guy to come through so that they can come to meet us. And we always talk about how you have the choice. This is your choice. I can help you. I can offer some things, different ways to do that. And I think that that can be a good way too of just getting them in the door, of saying like, hey, go meet them, see what you think, give that control. For a lot of kids that age, they're not accustomed to that much control. And I think having that is a really great way to start it. I think, again, that choice and going and meeting us for that first time is really important to try to help with that process.
Yeah, you make some great points. I mean, I think I heard four points. One was you sort of spoke to validating what the barriers are, right? I think parents, if they understand what are the barriers specific to their son that are stopping them from going to see a therapist or a coach, just validating those and showing them that you understand what they're going through and why this is hard for them to want to consider or want to agree to. Absolutely. So that's validating the barriers that their son is dealing with. That's one. I think you spoke to language, which is a great point. How you phrase things, how you bring this concept to them, and how you request their son, how they request their son to come see someone like us really makes a big difference. And the language they use matters. If they say something along the lines of go to work with this coach, it's going to sound a lot more approachable to someone that age because they might, play sports and be used to the athletic arena of things. So that's absolutely a great second point. The third one is keeping an open mind. You mentioned, basically, hey, let's give this a shot. Let's keep it an open mind. Let's give it a chance before we make up our mind about how this is going to go. And that encourages them to do something like a free consultation, which is what we offer, to get them to come in and say, what do you have to lose? It's 20 to 30 minutes to meet this person, whether it's John or myself, to get a feel for if it's a good fit or not. And especially if they're, in the 16, 17-year-old range or even a little bit older, you can give them that control to say, if you don't think it's a good fit, you don't have to come back. I think that's really important to give them that kind of choice. So those are the 4 points that you made, John. I'd like to add 2 more in the the column of what parents can do to help maximize the chance that their son goes to therapy. One is, put it in a family or parent context. A lot of times, if a young guy is made to feel like he's got to go get help, he's going to think something's wrong with him. And that doesn't feel good. It's going to make him shut down. It's going to make him want to, put the wall up and reject and be in denial that that's actually happening. And so sometimes if you take it out of the context of you need individual help and put it in the context of, hey, we're a family and we're all kind of struggling here. Can you help us as parents and go to this meeting for us so that we can do it together? That often takes it's out of the court of I have to do this individually, I need help individually, and puts it in the court of we're all in this together. And as parents, we're willing to model that we're willing to get help too. That often reduces the wall, reduces the barrier a little bit. The other one, I often encourage parents to use is to reduce the stigma. Use the example of physical health, right? If a young guy, let's take anxiety as an example. A lot of times with anxiety, there's physical symptoms, even nausea or getting sick to your stomach. If a young guy was dealing with some kind of physical health situation that led to those stomach symptoms, and the doctor, their parents or their doctor encouraged them to come get treatment, they would do it in a second. And I think if parents can put it in those terms and say, well, you would do this on the physical health side, you're struggling on the mental health side, but it's the same, it's all wrapped up together. Why not consider going to get help in the same way you would if this was a physical ailment that you were dealing with? So those are the 2 other things that I would add, the put it in the family or parent context instead of the individual context of why to get help. And then also try to use the example of a physical health situation versus a mental health situation in order to help them get closer to a willingness to accept help. So let's get into, that's the do column. Those are things that parents can do to help increase the chance that their son is going to be willing to see a coach or a therapist. What are some of the things that you think, John, in your opinion, that parents should probably not do or should stay away from doing?
Well, much of the opposite of what we kind of talked about for the do's. I think, coming at it from like an accusatory language of like, you need to go get help because something's wrong, putting it onto that, making it about the individual versus about, to your point, Jotham, about like, this is potentially a family systems piece. We need some support, and taking it away can make it less threatening. So the don'ts of, you need to go help. I've seen that you're really struggling. You're not doing things you should be doing. You need this, you need this. You're going to, by using that sort of accusatory direct language. The intent is not to put the walls up, but that is the impact of what's happening. Of you coming at them like that, of just those walls are going to get bigger and bigger, and ultimately it makes the work a little bit harder. So to begin with, we have to be deconstructing those walls to get at the individual to do the work. So that's why the importance of how to frame this is so important, to steer away from some of those pieces. And making it, like I said, about the individual and being really accusatory of that there's something wrong with you, and using those types of language is just gonna increase the person's anxiety, or that your son's anxiety, to want to go and see with us, talk to us, and to begin with. So those would be one of the things that I would definitely try to steer away from.
Yeah, it's a great point. So, accusations or threatening in any kind of way definitely, work against the whole process. Some other things I would add is, forcing them to go in any kind of way. You definitely want to avoid any kind of feel that you're forcing them into something that they don't want to do. Criticizing or labeling. I think name calling, calling them lazy, calling them a loser, any kind of name calling or criticisms definitely don't help. And you kind of touched on that a little bit. And the last one is bribing. Bribing is not a good habit to get into. You don't want to have to bribe them and set the tone for therapy for your son, to know that each time they're going to come in, they have to be given something. The exception to that is, if you can set up something, some kind of quality time after the first session, that's the exception. So you want to kind of incentivize, not bribe, but incentivize them to go to the session, to say, hey, afterwards, we'll go get a bite to eat together, or maybe we'll go do something fun together. Just to reward the fact that you were willing to go to something that's difficult. And it often helps at the end too, because when they come in, especially for the first time, it's nerve-wracking. They have to connect with someone who's a complete stranger, and they have to get into some things that are very uncomfortable. And so following that process up with something that's enjoyable, that's fun, that's relaxing, can really help cement that for them, so that they're willing to come back. So I think that's, we'll probably end on that note for today. I think we got into some great details when it comes to what to do as parents and what not to do. We're going to be doing a second one of these pretty soon in the Q&A series. We would encourage any parents to reach out to us by email. You can contact John or myself by email to submit any questions, and we would love to consider those questions for the second version of this Q&A series. John, I appreciate you joining me, and maybe we'll talk soon.
Yeah, sounds good. This was great.
All right, thanks.